Okay, so we're back to okay, so I'm continuing on now my discussion from last night. I was talking about loosely totalitarianism, a term which has been unfortunately replaced by in, an interesting word that really doesn't actually have the same connotations as the word totalitarian, authoritarian. So let's break this down, shall we? Let's think about the word totalitarian and what it means. Any good philosopher has to be quite wordy and expound paragraphs of explanations in order to define the terms they're using so that arguments can be regarded as at least starting to allude to something that is both rationally convincing and valid. So let's look at the validity of calling totalitarian regimes authoritarian and what those two words actually mean in relation to each other. So, as I probably you don't really realize, maybe a lot of people don't actually know, is that the the new emergent third world superpower, well, previously third world, but still probably third world, if those terms can still be used to apply to the types of worlds and countries that exist on our fair planet. China has been attempting to become the global economic superpower of the world for decades. Since we started outsourcing all of our manufacturing and use slave labor, um, very dodgy practices that involve putting to people to work in these horrible sweatshops where they had to do sort of things like 12-hour days for nothing. Yes, it's it's a dubious business practice, but do we really want to know that 20% of this make its way to isn't even calculated in horrible abattoirs? No, we don't want to know that. We don't want to know that our Gucci bag is made out of a dog, somebody's pet dog or a stray dog that was running down the street that some Chinese fellow decided to smash over the head with a giant club, which I actually saw on this thing, YouTube. It was quite traumatizing to me to see a large white fluffy dog being dragged into a large factory and smashed over the head with a giant club. George Floyd episode. No one should need or have to be subjected to a snuff movie, whether it's an animal or even worse, a human. Viewing real death on a video in my day when I was younger was regarded as a very shocking thing that was utterly censored, and was there were snuff movies around in the 90s where they had actors who they actually really killed on film for just, I don't know, reality or effect. We called them snuff movies back then. Snuff movies seem to have become commonplace. We so often see people being shot and murdered right in front of our eyes. Is this a desensitization program? Perhaps. But anyway, as we start venturing further and further into the 21st century, it seems readily apparent that many of the things that we took for granted are now not taken for granted and have been manipulated so that the current uprising generations have been pretty much programmed to believe that there's no such thing as a family. Husbands and wives are now known as partners, which was actually a term for business where people would team up and make a business. These are partners, business partners, or like legal firms often do it. Sort of Fitzpatrick and blah Johnson. So it's very interesting age where even the nuclear family has been broken down by gender difficulties, where people are confused about whether or not they're male or female, even though that's all there really is, apart from the one in 10,000 people who are hermaphroditic. Um, sort of gender fluidity. Okay, that's fine. People can dress up and want to be sort of like feminine or masculine, but it doesn't mean that they're a different gender. It doesn't mean you can't be a transsexual and think that you're not a male or a female. Whatever you are fucking born with your your genitalia, it dictates what sex you were when you were born. In nature, we look at other animals; they have two genders. Some genders, some animal species do indeed have it sort of like an androgynism of sorts, and the male or the female plays different roles. Sometimes the man, like in seahorses, for example, will carry the eggs and give birth to the little seahorse babies and stuff, or something like that, you know. So it's just, I don't know, it's a very strange and weird world we now live in, where a lot of the things we took for granted is actually, this is this and this is that, are now going to grey areas that are barely recognizable as my original topic. And I still really haven't got round to talking about this, even though, I don't specialize in political sciences. I'm not a sociologist. The current state of, say, if you want a contemporary anthropologist, what sort of term would you use for somebody who studies social order? Probably sociology. Then the general areas of sociology, I think it's you can easily say that we're talking in. But now I'm, as a philosopher, as somebody who was trained in logic, though I didn't complete my training, but I continued on to keep studying in my own way, autodidactically. Uh, if you don't know what the word autodidactic means, look it up in a dictionary. If you've got a dictionary, don't know what the word autodidactic means, look it up in a dictionary. If you've got a dictionary, I don't know if people have dictionaries anymore. They seem to think that they can get every answer they need from a smart device like an iPad or an iPuff or a phone or a smartphone or their computer and stuff. And sure, actually, I do that myself. I don't even actually have a dictionary with me. My dictionaries are in storage. Oh, actually, maybe I do have. I have a really old version of the Oxford dictionary from about 1890 or something. I picked up at a boot sale, and it was ridiculously cheap, but it just had some incredibly interesting words in it that you'd actually find in modern dictionaries, because unfortunately the English language has been in a massive amount of decline since the late 19th century. The amount of words that people use and their vocabularies are highly limited, almost similar to George Orwell's Newspeak, where he talks about the ruling totalitarian regime sort of reducing the number of words and simplifying language, burning books, editing history to suit their own agenda and purposes, which is exactly what's going on now. Except they're actually writing that, history, the propaganda, as if it's actual when it's not really actual. And if you truly look at it with a clear head and a shrewd mathematical mind, you will see that many of the things we're being told aren't quite what they really are. I grew up with Sesame Street. We had this thing on Sesame Street. Went, one of these things is not like the other. One of these things just isn't the same. So, and then it came up with a screen with 4 things in it. And one thing was totally different from the others. Like it might be a banana, an apple, and an orange. And then there might be a dog, So, oh, no, these are, plant derived fruits. This is an animal. So you could It was a way of actually giving you sort of like, a critical understanding of how to think, to sort of like place things in, like what I was saying in my earlier talk, into pigeonholes and convenient categories, so that we can subdivide all of the what we see reductionistically. In philosophy it's called reductionism. Reduce things down the parts so that we can place them in their own sets and subsets and groups, so that we can get a better understanding of how things interrelate from each other to each other from their various groupings, and the various, if they have a function, their functions, how it all interrelates, which is how we ended up developing sciences. And very sophisticated systems, like, say, the ecology of the Earth as a whole, has so many elements that I like to talk about climate change, because the climate is actually changing every second as we speak. Everyone keeps going on about climate change. Well, okay, we go through changes of weather every year. They got spring, summer, autumn, winter, spring. Keeps going around and around. Okay, so great. And another thing is, you get these people who have been buying all this, BS, that, everyone's selling a certain idea or whatever. Well, they are they've got an agenda behind what they're trying to do. The carbon tax, the Kyoto Protocol. I remember back in the early 90s, all the countries in the world agreed to stop polluting and having so many emissions from their cars. We had to get catalytic converters to stop the amount of carbon we're putting into the atmosphere, and coal-fired plants were going to be banned, and we're all going to have electric cars by the year 2000, and there wasn't going to be any more petrol, and is all running out because we'd reached global surplus supplies and all this other stuff, and it was all going to actually, even in the 80s, we were told that oil reserves of the world were going to be running out by the year 2001, or and it never happened. None of it actually happened. And then in the late 90s, to try and support their hypothesis that the actual natural global warming of the planet, which is actually part of the greenhouse effect, because we're in an interglacial period. In an interglacial period, carbon dioxide levels actually do rise more and more and more. A lot of theories as to why. Usually, it actually has a lot to do with there being more animals around, more sort of more organisms that convert oxygen. They take in oxygen, they breathe it, and then they breathe out carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is taken up by fauna. We then fix the carbon into the soil and breathe out oxygen, and so on. So that's called the carbon cycle. Without carbon dioxide, the world would die. All plants on Earth would die, and we would die. We can't, and also the amount of carbon dioxide is actually really quite small compared to, say, nitrogen, as gases go. So I don't want to go into that, but I want to talk about all of these things that have to do with everything that we were told and everything we were heading for, or supposed to be heading for, when I was, say, a teenager or in my 20s. So we wanted to stop the global warming. Even though global warming is supposed to be happening right now, because we're on the tail end of what was a major glaciation 12,500 years ago. Now we're into, where are we? We're somewhere in the middle between the end of the last minor. It wasn't actually a major glaciation. Some glaciations have been so severe that the entire world has been completely covered by a mile thick of ice. How life managed to survive through that, we don't know, but before the Oligocene. There were periods where they believed that the entire Earth was actually just basically an ice ball. So, they kept throwing out all these images of, those polar bears sort of swimming in the sea. Oh, we can't find any ice. Oh, the global ice cap's melting. They're drowning. That's bullshit. Those are actual pictures of those polar bears. They actually naturally swim. They've been known to swim for something like 100 miles. They actually are really amazingly good swimmers, and that's because they've adapted to an environment where a lot of where they are for half the year turns into seawater. Where they did roam, it was ice in the winter. So the polar caps advance and retreat every year. The northern polar cap almost completely goes. It's 1/10 the size in the polar summer. In the polar summer is like there's one day. There's no night. In the Arctic region, you have days that last for months. I mean, surely most people must know this. So I'm just imparting knowledge of somebody in school would know as a 14-year-old probably, but it's just I'm trying to simplify things a bit. So if you look at all of these spurious claims that the polar caps are melting, and then they're sort of like showing polar bears. Okay, so they're roaming further south because, well, I don't think it has anything to do with the fact that there's less ice around. I think they're just coming further encroaching into areas where and people are seeing them more because we are more mobile, we're more around them in places, But, yeah, it's really weird. You've got so many people, saying this, that, and the other, and if you really do your own investigations, then you can come up with your own conclusions. And I've come up with quite a few conclusions about some of these things. I think that global warming is what we're supposed to be going through. The Earth has been much hotter in the past, and of course much colder, but and the carbon dioxide levels have been far higher than they are now, and they will increase to a point, a limit, and this always happens. The Earth reaches a limit to which how much carbon dioxide in relation to other gases can actually subsist alongside nitrogen, oxygen, argon, and all the other ones, helium. I mean, some of those gases I'm naming there are such small proportions. Yeah, so the main ones are nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen, which become oxides and bond with other chemicals. And organic chemistry, we had basically the three fundamental elements in organic chemistry are hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. So you have hydroxys. So I did some research about global warming. Still digressing, I haven't gone on about totalitarianism, but totalitarianism to me is a term that aptly describes political systems that have total control of the people through knowing everything that they are doing. In a sense, the hegemonic world we live, the hegemony of the general world as it is today in relation to the, say, intelligence forces. Let's say, for example, like as Snowden was telling us about 10 or 12 years ago before he took off to Russia, we have been in an ultimate world surveillance state since at least the mid-90s, where everybody's phone calls are being recorded every second. Everything I'm saying right now is being recorded in huge data banks. 10 years ago, that would have been deleted after about 7 days, but they were able to retrospectively look back at what everything has happened, every text, every broadcast, everything by computers. This was known as echelon. Echelon is the hardware that spies on the world. And the headquarters moved from England to America, the UK, USA, combination of intelligence forces. The power was swung over to America, and now the NSA have got a backdoor on every single internal surveillance installation in the world. And that's common knowledge if you want to, listen to what Snowden spilled the beans on many years ago. And some of us who, I'm not going to say conspiracy theorists, but people are interested to know what is actually going on behind the scenes, have known about this type of thing since at least the early 90s, when they first started bringing out cell phones. All cell phones could be tracked in the 90s as well. The only way to stop that tracking was that you take your battery out. Now they've actually got GPS locators inside the phone, so they know exactly where you are within a half a meter or probably less, and exactly where you've gone and what you've been doing, even if the phone's fucking off. So, surveillance, Big Brother. I mean, George Orwell couldn't even have dreamt of how far the monitoring of individuals that make up society has progressed to. It's way beyond even the idea of Big Brother watching you through a camera on your TV. I'm actually, there are cameras on modern TVs now, just like there's a camera on my computer, there's a camera on your phone. What better way for Big Brother to keep an eye on you when you've got cameras on every single device, every little screen? I mean, it's as a brainwashing tool. All these screens that people are carrying around, and they're sort of so portable. I mean, oh my God! Even as a mind control tool, it doesn't. It's not too far of a leap of faith if you're someone like me who was around before people had portable screens and TVs on their wrists. It's not a huge leap of faith to think that the telephones, the TV that was brainwashing is now moved to portable screens. And when you see younger generations wandering around completely oblivious to the external universe, sucked into this cyber reality on their devices, in a sense, they are being mind controlled. The addiction to stimulation from these screens that seems to override the immense amazingness of actual reality. Like, you want to look at some cloud formations, for example, or look at the snow on the hills, feel the wind in your face. So it seems strange to me how so many have been drawn into this artificial reality, almost as if that's more important than what's going on around them. I remember a friend of mine, Glenn, he was telling me about some people he was watching, an Asian couple in a car in front of him. He lives out of North Beach, and the guy was looking at the phone, obviously probably using it as a map to try and work out where he was going, but he was looking so much at the at the screen while he was driving to get an idea where he was going. He just drove straight into the middle of a roundabout because he's relying more on the screen that's in his hand than actually looking around at actual reality and what's going on around him. So this is some of the signs of the times. People are being sort of hypnotized, mesmerized, if you like, by their screens. And Big Brother is really doing a real good sort of number on us, and with tools that George Orwell could never have even imagined that could have come into being. So I'm going to get back to my topic of totalitarianism. So in order for a totalitarian state, or say, or a whole world government to be able to exert its totalitarian control, is to know what everybody's doing at any time. And they've known that since the 90s. And then there's people come up and goes, oh, that's all right, I don't care if they know what I'm doing or what I'm buying or blah, 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 or who I'm seeing or who I'm screwing or what I aren't doing, or what drugs I buy, or who I'm talking to, or who I associate with, etc., etc. I've got nothing to hide, Well, you might not have anything to hide, and you might think that everything you're doing is legal now, but who knows? In a couple of weeks' time, a whole bunch of rabid anti-alcohol sort of activists might suddenly change the law, and you might find that it's like the 1920s. Alcohol is illegal, and then you'll find that when you're trying to find your mate who makes a really good home brew or his own home whiskey and stuff, and trying to get some off him, you're going to be arrested because you've used your phone to ask him if he's got any more of his really nice home brew. You see things like this happen, and we never know, how things could change, considering how drastically they already have. So I'm getting back to my topic again. So everyone's spending around this word authoritarian, but they don't really know what it means. I mean, it means that we have an authority, the government, the ruling, the government. We have ways of making you speak. That's why I have this light behind me, so it's shining at you, so that it's like an interrogation. But I'm not asking you anything, I'm just telling you crap. So authoritarian. So who was the authority? So can we believe our authorities, the people who we we so let's look at this word authoritarian. Authority, author. So an author is somebody who writes, who creates usually a verbal sort of pronouncement. So I was or produces some type of thing that expresses maybe some artistic sentiment or some theory, or you can be an author of a scientific publication, or an author of a poem, or you could be an author of a symphony. They're all, you're an author. But so you have various authors who can present various perspectives and opinions, and you can gravitate towards the authors that you feel are in line with how you view things. If you think they're right or wrong, or they have more validity or less validity. So you can go. So let's think authoritarian. So think about what it means. We could even look it up. We could look up on Wikipedia, shall we? Or Wiktionary. No, I don't think I will. I'll just look it up on authoritarian. Let's see what sort of definition the propaganda machine gives us. Authoritarian, favouring and enforcing strict obedience to authority at the expense of personal freedom. So, and then we'll look up the word totalitarian, shall we? And see if there's any vast difference between them. Totalitarianism. Wow, I can actually spell it. Okay, a system of government that is centralized and dictatorial and requires complete subservience to the state. So that's a little more extreme than authoritarianism, but if we look at this at the expense of personal freedom, complete, to me they mean the same thing. I mean, it's pretty much the same. So look at that dictatorial. That is an example of where we have been manipulated, where the actual words we're using, just like in George Orwell's 1984 with Newspeak, we are being influenced by invisible forces that are very slowly rewriting history as it unfolds. Now, I mean, keep looking at this more and more. I think we are basically being manipulated by unseen force. The unseen force is not an unseen force at all. It's actually a really souped up and very onto it psychological operation that's been perpetrated by China. I think the Chinese intelligence have become very savvy to the techniques that people like the CIA have been using. That they've done their they've done their work, and they're very slowly seeing if they can just start altering people's perception of making it more acceptable to have less and less freedom, to have less and less individual choice in what we do and how we conduct our lives, so that we can become more comfortable about being told what is the reality according to the state. If the state people disagree, you must be told what is right and what is wrong. You are irresponsible, and they start using tactics of making out that those people who are speaking out against the state are baddies or versives that are doing damage to the established order and blah blah blah. This all smacks of totalitarianism, of brainwashing, mind control. The same type of brainwashing, mind control that sent people in droves, like millions of sheep, to raise their arms to a very shrewd and intelligent fellow who pretty much, dominated the middle of the 20th century's history, from the 1930s onwards, managed to stamp a logo over the entire country that he gained control of with his political party. A logo that he stole from Hinduism that actually means peace. But not many people understand why the symbolism of the swastika was used. It was used because the dictator that rose to power at that time, just before the Second World War, was brainwashing the youth and all the people of his country to believe that they were trying to unify the world under the banner of world peace. But what were they really doing? We know now that what they were really doing was a eugenics program where they're trying to wipe out the money lenders and the bankers who had too much control. So they started shifting them off to concentration camps. They eliminated all people that were a burden to the state, because most of the world was in a massive depression. So they gassed and murdered people in wheelchairs, people who had needed constant healthcare, the supposedly mentally ill, anyone who had a deformity or was a burden to the state was killed to make it easier on those who were healthy and perfect and blue-eyed and blonde-haired. Ridiculous. Yes, so that is shocking. That how could actually somebody follow orders to get into a bus that's just loaded with a whole lot of, say, Down syndrome people and people that we look after in shelters and that type of thing, and then drive that bus around until they've died a horrible death of being gassed by the very monoxide fumes that are coming out of the bus itself, being fed back into it. That's what they did to approximately, what? It was something like 250,000 people, 250,000 people were gassed and put to death that way. This is before they even actually started building and making the concentration camps. So it was all a way of sort of trying to, and they're also sterilizing people, sterilizing anyone who had some sort of deformities or, it was all part of this, like, eugenics program. If anyone's seen the film Gattaca, there's very similar things and sentiments have been coming out too in the way people think, with Agenda 21, which I've only just been sort of like reading about, and then remembered. I remember when this happened. I remember the Rio summit. I know about the Kyoto moralistic duty of everybody to reduce pollution, care for the planet, all of those things, which are noble ideals. It's not as if this is a bad thing. I think there is a noble ideals that we want to preserve. Should it be up to governments to control all of these processes so that, and if you don't agree, should you be allowed to live your life as you want? And if you're in an authoritarian or totalitarian regime, how can you escape? Where can you go? Do you run back into the forest, live in a cave? Do you into the money system with taxes and the whole sort of economic hoo-ha, or do you just deny money, deny all of the power of the state, and create your own world in harmony with nature? Find a place where you can go where it's not too much of a struggle to battle with, but actually work in harmony with nature. And there are ways of doing that where we really don't need money. I mean, if you look at the the history of humankind, going back to when we first started making fire, for example, one of our greatest technological achievements was actually the ability to create fire. No other animal does this. No other animal makes fire. That's what sets us apart from, and we started doing other clever things like using tools. Yes, other animals use tools too. Birds use tools. They use sticks to get things. Chimpanzees grab bones and things just like in 2001: A Space Odyssey. Oh, clunk, clunk, clunk. Oh, I could hit something. That's a basic tool. It gives you greater strength to meet an opponent. And so, all of our psychology is based on these ideas of fight and flight, even though there is actually another thing. We can choose to fight, we can choose to flee, or we can choose to confront and not so confront, but communicate. There is another one, which is neither fight nor flight, but is actually an attempt to sort of like have some type of symbiotic, say maybe make a symbiotic relationship with whatever you feel is a threat or something that you should either run away from or fight, because there are other options like cooperation. And these are some of the yawning massive faults with, say, modern psychology. When I studied psychology, it assumed that every person is basically an animal, a responsive animal, like some sort of like biological meat machine that is only capable of being able to respond to the world with two scenarios: either fighting it or running away from it. There was no in between. I couldn't. These fundamentals just don't make any sense to me because there are other choices. Even in nature, you can see that many animals have to use each other's, and actually help each other in order to sort of survive. There's certain, let's say, rhinoceroses that let a certain bird stay on their back a lot because the birds like to eat off the things that, insects that are annoying their back and stuff. So we have to create symbiotic relationships, and this is something that psychology doesn't seem to have actually caught up with the natural sciences. It's in its own la la land. When I studied psychology years ago, maybe it has now. I don't know. Probably not, considering they're even calling things like basic human emotions a mental illness, like sadness. Even crying is supposed to be a mental illness now. It's ridiculous, really. Oh, he's crying. Oh, God, he must be mentally ill. Here, take a pill and you won't feel anything. We can turn you into a zombie. Yay! Oh, great, I don't feel anything anymore. I'm wandering around and everything is sort of okay. And I'm neither happy or sad. I'm just in a sort of a semi-awake daze. Yeah, so, which most of those drugs really just do that anyway. And they just subdue your emotions and feelings. And, so basically, all you really need to do is function as a biological meat machine, is to eat and survive and breathe. And, anything else apart from that is, is an aberration. So, So getting back to the topic of the totalitarianism, with numerous digressions, branching off into all sorts of other sort of little side topics. So we can come back to our theme here, the authoritarian / totalitarian thing, right? So I don't know if anybody remembers an album called The Wall, or even a film called The Wall. Some of these ideas have been, pushed upon us. When I went to school in our education, we were taught to question things. Actually, we were taught to question society and the mistakes of the past, and it led my generation to do things like march on the streets and object to a rugby tour because of apartheid. We went out and we went, stop the tour, because we didn't agree with the apartheid that was going on in South Africa. It was disgustingly racist. There was one law for the white South African colonials and another law for the indigenous African people, and it was unfair and horrible, really. So a lot of people took a stand and even like fought against the riot police with, anybody who was in New Zealand at the time knew what happened. People were putting crash helmets on and marching, going, stop the tour. People dropping flower bombs on the rugby fields from aeroplanes, and all sorts of crazy shit was going on. It was like a revolution was happening because we wanted to stop apartheid. Because, and I'm not going to go hashtag BLM, because think about what we did. Nelson Mandela himself even applauded the efforts of the New Zealand people in order to try and sort of like stop apartheid by using boycotting of sport. And it spilled over into like the Commonwealth Games. Actually, that was before that, the Moscow Games. So boycotting. What the hell has happened to boycotting? Why people don't boycott anymore? I've been boycotting McDonald's since 1991. I boycott a lot of things that I don't agree with. I don't support them. I don't throw this dross, this material money and stuff at these things that I believe are destroying the planet, like McDonald's, for example, a huge conglomerate industry. I want to talk out against McDonald's, one of the most evil corporations the world has ever seen. A couple were fighting McDonald's for 20, 30 years in England because they put out leaflets that said the truth. And the truth is that McDonald's are responsible for the deforestation of the Amazon by promoting monocultures in South America. South Africa. Maybe they've got them there in in Africa as well now. Who knows? They're pretty huge. They've grown since then, but back then they had shares in, almost controlling shares pretty much. McDonald's are massive. They have back then it was called Agricorp. Agricorp was a huge conglomerate food business. They were going into South America, promoting things like industrial